About that. Welcome, everyone, to the next session of our very exciting day. Making AI useful, and as Suzanne said, living in a digital era. I'd like to share my screen and introduce my co-host, Josie Boyle. Give me 1 second to share, and then we will kick it off. Josie, is it showing up?
Looks good.
All right, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to our session, the second session of the day. Some of you were in our webinar just before this, so good to see you again.
For the national contest.
Um, and Becca, could you switch to the next slide? I just want to really quickly go over our agenda. We'll be talking today, by the way, this is recorded. We'll be sharing out the recording afterwards as well as the resources. And today we're going to talk about understanding generative AI, going over some tips to make AI work for you as a personal assistant. And also, given our background working in digital inclusion, we're really going to be focusing on generative AI inside of digital literacy programs and how you can use it within your communities that you serve if you do work in digital inclusion. And of course, stick around to the end. We'll be doing a giveaway of a different online course. I wanted to start off with a quick poll to see what your thoughts are on AI. Becca, if you could launch that poll. So please take a minute. We've got two questions here. What is your current personal attitude towards generative AI? And second, what is your level of experience? So we'll give you a minute or so to answer. And Becca, let us know once we've got most people responded.
We are plugging along.
Awesome.
What we are seeing is most people by far are cautiously optimistic, followed by love it, followed by neutral, unsure, and we got a couple of opposed. I see you. And we're going to give it just a couple more seconds. Almost everyone has participated. We understand some of you might be grabbing a coffee. So here's where we are. We are at majority cautiously optimistic. Close behind, tapping it on the shoulder is love it. Right behind love it is arms crossed with neutral. And then we got some side eye with skeptical and opposed. I'll go ahead and end it there. We see you.
And how about the second question about experience level? How are we looking there?
Here's where we are. What is your experience level with using it? Okay, winner, intermediate. I use generative AI tools occasionally for my work. It's tied behind that with beginner. Like I've tried a few times and trying it out. That's tied with advanced. I incorporate this along with what I do. Toward the tail end, we got some arms crossed with like none, nope, and no thank you. But that's tied with expert. I can do this.
Okay, awesome. So that helps inform how we're going to talk about this today. And I would say our approach to this webinar is kind of in line with that. We're sort of taking the love it / cautiously optimistic approach. We're going to focus on how you can use AI to help your life today. We're going to acknowledge some of the risks briefly, but that's not the focus of this webinar. And I want to just say, first of all, that Becca and I are not AI experts by any means. We use it in our work, in our daily lives, but I'm sure there are people on the call that have experience with different AI tools than we do, that have maybe used it in different contexts than us. So we would love audience participation in this webinar. If you have suggestions, things you've tried, please share those throughout the chat, because I'm sure we can all benefit from learning from each other, since this is a rapidly evolving thing that's entered our life and our society in just the last couple of years. And with that, I'll pass it on to Becca.
And following up what Josie said, we are certainly not cheerleaders. So our goal here is not to portray AI as the savior, the next big thing. Oh, it's so wonderful. We purposely titled this with the paradox. The first part is making AI useful. And that's what we want to do today. The second part is living in a digital era. Like, yeah, recognizing that. So here's how we would like to use our time. And we're pretty much going to like split up the rest of our 1 hour session. I'm going to talk about some specific ways that work for us to make AI useful to us as professionals. So we recognize that you on the call today, that you joining us, we have different jobs. We might work in similar fields, but our jobs are different. And so our approach is I'm going to talk about some very specific ways that AI has become useful to me, and that has become my assistant. But then the entire second half is going to be Josie talking about how we can build this into teaching digital skills, how we can address this AI as the next trend in the digital divide. This is the next big thing that is actually causing the chasm. And therefore, in our digital literacy programs and skills and curriculum, how can we start to teach others about it? And so that's sort of the overview of our approach. So long before ChatGPT, we still had AI in our lives. AI has been working for us in many, many ways that we appreciate. So acknowledging its irritations, we love using Nav. We love the streaming programs that make recommendations, right? We love like Siri and Alexa, and we love when we text. Well, my husband doesn't love this, but generally, it's helpful when we text that it's like auto correcting our words or that you can train it to auto correct your vocab, right? So, very long before the current conversation about AI was already there and was already assisting our lives or at least accompanying our lives in useful ways. And so, our mindset matters. For those of us who said, like, I love it, I'm getting to know it. Our goal here is some specific ways that you can get to know it even better. For those of you who said, like, look, I'm new at this and I'm not really sure. This is meant to meet you where you are and show you some things that have worked for professionals. But one thing that AI can be great for is simply experimentation. Is to simply experiment. And I don't mean experiment with what's out there. I mean experiment with what works for you. Like, what do you need? What could you use some assistance with? And how could you get it to work for you? How could you train it? So as Josie said, we're not engineers, we're not coders, we're digital navigators who work for a nonprofit, right? But we recognize that there are many tools out there, and we're specifically going to talk about ChatGPT because that's what we use and because it has such an extensively researched free version. So that's another reason it's been so researched and refined and free that is the platform we'll be discussing, recognizing that there are many other generative tools that you can choose. And we're going to talk about training it. Teamwork makes the dream work. The teamwork we're talking about is between you and AI. We would love to hear in the chat other things that work for you, especially those who were in the minority, but definitely here, who said, I'm an expert. I use this. I know this. This works for me. I use this. Please contribute in the chat. I want to show two examples today of how you can get and train ChatGPT to help you in your tasks in your job. Here are instructions that I typically use. I divide it into these 4 categories: instructions, constraints, example, additional information. And what I mean is, this is my template that I fill in to plug into ChatGPT, and I'll show you that in just a sec. I'm going to be doing a little bit of reading, and I don't want to lose anybody here. I also subscribe to ChatGPT. And because of that, because I subscribe to it, I sort of have my ChatGPT trained. And therefore, to do this demo, I wanted to pick an example that's currently not in my ChatGPT's memory. And so I picked something to show you just how it's going to react going into this with no knowledge. So here's how I would write out my instructions. Write a short description of a webinar. I am presenting the webinar that I am presenting. The webinar will be about how bunnies are good pets. I consider myself a rabbit expert because I've owned and cared for rabbits for almost 25 years. True. The webinar will include other people who are knowledgeable about bunnies, including a vet and another rabbit owner. The webinar audience will be a variety of professional adults who may or may not know anything about rabbits. I'm going to give it some constraints. Constraints are important for the purpose of what you're trying to do. I'm going to tell it, since this is a webinar description that I'm wanting it to make, I'm going to tell it, use plain language and accessible words, keep the tone positive and professional, write 1 paragraph that is no longer than 6 sentences. And if you can write a solid paragraph that's shorter than 6 sentences, please do that. So I'm giving it specific constraints of what I want it to do. If you can give it an example of something that you want, this is a great idea. So I simply copy pasted the webinar description for this webinar to give ChatGPT an example of a good webinar description. Notice that the example I'm giving it, it doesn't have anything to do with bunnies. It doesn't have anything to do with vets or rabbit owners. But I'm modeling this, I'm giving it like a good model. And so I'm not going to read this part because you know the webinar description for this one, you're here, right? But the point here is, if you have a good example, if you can copy paste a good example that you want to use as a model, definitely give ChatGPT that info. It will help it. Oh, I'm sorry, I went back. Last thing, anything that you can give ChatGPT as additional information that it can pull from is a good tip. I want to point out that one of the main differences, and again, there are so many other tools out there, but we're just talking about ChatGPT right now. But I want to point out that the free version of ChatGPT, OpenAI, that's out there does not comb websites. Therefore, if there's additional information about something that you want it to generate, you should copy paste that information into the section called additional information so that it can pull from that. It will also pull from its extensive databases and thousands of algorithms, right? Like, it'll also pull from that. But including this will help your prompt be specific. The subscribed paid version of ChatGPT does comb websites. So if your organization or if you have some version that will comb websites, put that in here. Use this website, look at this website, look at websites that are out there. So here is what I'm now going to enter into ChatGPT. Let me get in there. Here we go. What can I help with? I will tell you. Here are my instructions. Let's see what it does. Josie, can you see the screen?
Yep, sure can.
Here we go. Here we go. This webinar will cover why bunnies make great pets, from their gentle nature to the joy they bring to a household. As someone with nearly 25 years of experience caring for rabbits, I'll share practical tips on their care and behavior. Joining me are a veterinarian who specializes in rabbit health and another longtime rabbit owner who will provide their expert insights. Whether you're familiar with rabbits or completely new to the idea, this session will help you understand what makes these animals such wonderful companions. It followed my advice. The tone, and again, I'm not a cheerleader, right? This is not the actual description that I would formally present, but it's really close. And it's easier to edit what it just came up with than it would be for me to write the description myself. So it did what I said, the number of sentences, the plain and accessible language, the overall webinar description, and who would be involved in that. Some of the things that I would change if it were me, I would take out the I, right? I would be using the names of the people who were involved. I would be, changing some things. But one of the things about me is I've actually taught writing for most of my life before coming to CTN. And I have mixed feelings about, Chat GPT and AI tools in academic environments and writing and plagiarism and all of those arguments. However, it is always easier as busy professionals to edit than it is to create. So the more instructions that you can give and then get yourself a draft, the better. That saves you time. Josie, can you see my slideshow?
Yes.
So in the last few minutes of the making AI useful portion, I want to go over one more thing that I have found really helpful as a working professional. I know that this is a lot of words here, but the example that I just went through was causing it to generate something from a lot of information I already had. So I already had, like, look, I'm doing this webinar. It's about bunnies. Here's what I want to talk about. Here's some additional information. Here's what I want you to put in there. Here's what like I was giving it the content. I just wanted it to make it pretty and write it for me. But another way that AI can really help us as professionals is when you don't know what the heck is actually going on. When you're like, oh, I'm supposed to write this document and I don't even know what it is. If you are joining us from the session that we did right before this one, that session was called Authentic Leadership. And one of the things that was covered was micromanagement and was like, working for challenging people. So what if you're working for someone who's like, hey, we need a terms and conditions document. Can you draft that up with a privacy policy? And you're thinking to yourself, no, right? So what happens when you need to draft something that's credible that you're not familiar with? I want to go over things that you can simply type into Chat GPT and use it as a starting point, use it as a launch pad. So I know that there are a lot of words on the screen, but these are situations that I have either been in, or I know other professionals outside of CTN who have been in these exact situations. So here are various things that you could do. You could tell it the first point. I need to write a press release about a recent event hosted by my company. Give me the standard components of a press release, as well as a detailed description of each section. And within 30 seconds, it will give you an outline. And look, will it be perfect? I don't know. Will it have some flaws? I don't know. But now you have something that you can tailor, and you didn't have to do all of that research on your own. There's nothing wrong with research, and there's nothing wrong with looking that up on your own. But in order to make AI useful, and in order to save yourself time, this is a great consideration. And I see a lot of I cannot do two things at once. but I see that the chat is very active, and there are probably a trillion tips in there as well to use. Couple more things before I wrap up my part and turn it over to Josie. Here are some other things that I have seen ChatGPT help with. Second point, give me a standardized template of a terms and conditions agreement that includes a privacy policy. I work for a nonprofit organization, not for a big company, and we'll need to tailor it to our needs. Any type of information that you can give it about what you're looking for will help it mine its databases and its information and give you specifically what you're looking for. Last point, I just did this the other day, not me personally, but someone I know just did this. My healthcare team is trying to become better at making collaborative decisions, but this is hard because we're busy and stressed. Generate a list of ways for teams and groups to brainstorm and make decisions. In addition to formal and standard methods, include fun ideas, creative strategies, and unique concepts. One of the reasons I wanted to point this out is because I think that a lot of times with generative AI, we think of it generating a product. Create this image, create this template, create this document. But knowing that it has all of this information, you can also have it provide you strategies, tips, and something that I usually do when I'm in a position like this is I usually use instructions like this that go beyond the standard. Because one pattern that I've noticed with ChatGPT is it will often give you robotic answers. This organizational strategy is effective for collaborative. It's like, no, I know that already. Give me unique ways that teams can work together. Give me unique things that people don't generally think about. Like, give me ways that teams work, right? And it'll give you a ton of information. But now you and your team have stuff to talk through that you didn't have before. We're trying to make AI useful to you in your job. We've gone over just a couple of tips. You guys have probably even had better tips than I have in the chat, so please keep track of that. But as we think of training AI to be your assistant, training AI to be your team member, here are some last considerations for you before we wrap this up and transition into the digital divide and digital literacy curriculum. When you're using AI and it's giving you information, give it positive feedback. This is something that I do, and it took me a minute to realize that I needed to do this, because when you ask it for something and it gives you something, you're just like moving on with your day, right? But I thought, like, I'm going to start to tell it, like, this is great. This is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. This is perfect. And the reason I give it positive feedback is I know that it's monitoring it, that it is constantly self-improving before it takes over the world, but that's a problem for a different day. But I know that it's paying attention to it, and it is helpful to me for it to know, oh, this worked. I'm going to do this next time. This algorithm worked. I'm going to do this next time. That's helpful for me. So one thing that we often don't think of when things work well is reinforcing the fact that it worked well. So just typing in like, this is great, this is what I needed, this is perfect. Of course, give it constructive feedback. So in the example that I just did about the bunny webinar, I would have just taken that and I would have just edited it on my own because I'm a pretty comfortable writer. But other people could say, this is too informal, don't use I. You provide me this same description, but take out the first person voice, right? And it would do it again. It's a back and forth. You are going back and forth. You do not have to simply accept what it's giving you. You can push back and push back and push back and have this like dialogue with what you need. Before I finish the last 2 points, one more thought about the back and forth. Another thing that you can use generative tools for is a lot of times because our organization, a CTN, because we're so dedicated to our mission and because we've been around for so long, and some of the things that I do are forward facing. If I came up with that webinar description, one thing that I would do is I would copy paste the final webinar description into Chat GPT, and I would say, is there anything offensive here? Is there any isolating language here? Is this a politically correct? Simply because I'm using it to edit me. Like, is there anything potentially like offensive or dismissive that's in my language? And I don't have to accept everything that it says, but it has then served as like a checkpoint for me. And remember, I've trained it. So it's like serving as a real team member for me, and it can sort of double check maybe if I had blind spots. Last couple of tips. Remember the components like instructions, constraints, examples, additional information. As you start to formulate your prompts, save them. Like save like a Word doc or a Google doc or whatever of your prompts. And that way that's additionally saving you time in the future because you can just take what you've done and like save a new copy and go forth and conduct your experiment. So do try this at home in making AI useful to you. We'll now transition to Josie about how to approach digital skills and making AI useful for everyone. Josie.
Awesome. Thanks, Becca. So that first portion of the presentation was really about how you might use AI, but we are coming at this topic from the perspective of working in digital inclusion. And so we're going to switch and pivot a little bit to talking about AI within that sphere. So this isn't just an AI thing. With every major development in technology, right, people respond to that differently. You always have early adopters who are really eager to try it out, to use it, to really, they're chomping at the bit to take advantage of the new technology. You also have those who adopt it more hesitantly, that have concerns, that take some more time to get comfortable with it. Then you have folks who don't use the technology at all due to various barriers like cost or access. You know, if they don't have the internet, they can't use ChatGPT, right? And some people don't adopt a technology because of lack of interest, lack of need, or maybe just they're not aware that a tool exists. And of course, there's always those too who resist using a technology due to personal objections. And all of this has been going on in the last couple of years as generative AI tools have exploded into society. And so, you know, we all have our personal choices about AI, how we use it in our personal life, how we use it professionally. But our concern within digital inclusion is thinking about how this fits into our work, how it impacts the digital divide, and how it can benefit or harm the communities and the learners that we work with. So I just picked a few headlines from the news about, you know, some of the concerns about the AI divide within different communities, within different socioeconomic groups, within different parts of the world. So this is a big concern. If we can move to the next slide, Becca. So this idea of the new digital divide. So thinking about, we've got the definition from NDIA here of digital equity, meaning everyone basically has what they need for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. And I would say now we can argue that AI literacy is a basic digital skill. It is part of digital equity. And, you know, similar to when earlier technologies emerged, like the calculator or just the internet, email, the people who started using those gained a leg up, an advantage over the people who didn't use those tools. And it's the same thing that's happening now with generative AI. So I would argue that AI literacy, or basically what Becca was talking about earlier, the ability to use generative AI tools, to engineer prompts to get AI to work for you as a personal assistant, is becoming kind of an essential skill for that full participation. And so I wanted to give a personal example about my mom. So my mom is, I think, 65, and she is very digitally literate. She's not, a lot of people talk about their parents coming to them for help with questions. This is not the case with my mom. She's very comfortable with technology, with her smartphone, with her laptop. But just recently, maybe a month or so ago, I noticed firsthand the difference of how the AI divide is playing out a little bit. And so for context, my mom is the director of a teeny tiny historical museum in a small town in Minnesota. And she was working on a grant application. And she, got it as far as she could easily. And then she turned it off to an employee and said, "Can you, work on finessing this?" And she was telling me she was so impressed at what he gave back to her just like an hour later. And I looked at what she had received from him and I said, "Oh, I think he probably used ChatGPT." And she didn't know what that was. And so I was kind of surprised that she hadn't heard of it yet, but um, that's just sort of what's happening. If you're working in fields where your coworkers are talking about it a lot, or you're hearing about it through work, you may have been playing around with it now for a couple of years, but you easily might not know about it. And so I pulled up ChatGPT. I gave her a quick lesson. We put in a nice prompt, and it spit out a wonderful draft of a grants proposal, and she was blown away. So this is just a good example of how, if you're already using technology, you're already technologically savvy, but if you don't have that AI literacy, you kind of are you're falling behind. So you have the potential to fall behind in your productivity. Not that she couldn't have done that on her own, but not nearly as quickly. Okay, so moving on a little bit, I want to talk about how AI can help us in different ways, how it can help different individuals differently. So we've been talking about how Becca and I use generative AI in our professional life to get things done faster, to brainstorm, to come up with drafts of text that we can then just run with and edit. So it's a time saver, it's helpful professionally. But if we think about the communities we serve a lot within digital inclusion, the people sort of on the wrong side of the digital divide, they stand to benefit in different ways from adopting generative AI. So the first example here is we work a lot with immigrant populations, people with limited English proficiency. And one way that AI can really help is we can use AI for language translation, for English language learning support, simplifying or generating text, things like that. And I'm curious in the chat, please put your experience with this if you've used generative AI in any of these contexts. But what I like specifically about AI is it doesn't just translate, because we've had translation tools for a long time. Google Translate is fantastic. But what it can do that's different is you can say, "Hey, I need you to write an email to my landlord telling them that the oven is broken." And you can write that in your language. If you're an immigrant, you can write that in the language you're most comfortable with and say, "Hey, I need you to write this in English." And it will spit out a lovely email for you. So it's not just translating, but it's actually generating texts for you. At the same time, if you speak some English, you can take a text in English and say, "ChatGPT, I would like you to simplify this, explain this in other ways, explain this in my language." Moving on to low-income communities that we work with a lot. So you can use AI for a lot of things. I tested this, by the way. You can sort of say, "Hey, I am experiencing food insecurity." And it will, and you can get really specific about it. You can say what state you're located in, and it will give you suggestions of what programs, what public benefits are available, even locally to the city level. It can provide links to resources. It can help you locate free or discounted services and give advice on finding jobs, applying for jobs, building any other types of bringing in income. It can provide advice on. And then many of the people that we work with might have limited formal education. And AI is fantastic in this regard. You can use AI basically as a personalized tutor. So if paying for online courses is out of your reach, AI can help a lot with that. You can use it to simplify explanations of complex topics. You can use it for daily communication. So, for example, if we're helping folks that maybe have lower literacy, AI can help them to write professional texts. You can write something yourself and have ChatGPT proofread that for you, have it make suggestions. So you're not just using AI to do a task for you, you can actually use it to improve your own skills. And I think that's something that we don't always hear about. I think especially when you hear about AI within education and schools, there's a lot of understandable fear of kids using AI to just do their work for them. But I also just want to remember that AI, it's not necessarily always cheating, right? If you're using AI to improve your own writing, to improve your own skills in a particular topic. Okay, so one thing that I really like about generative AI, and again, we're focusing on ChatGPT because that's what Becca and I are most familiar with. I love that there was a lot of sharing in the chat about other tools. I'm definitely curious to check out Claude after this, but we're focusing on ChatGPT. What I like about it is it's a very simple interface. There's not a lot going on the screen. It's pretty easy to use, right? You type something in, it spits out an answer. That's really nice for those with lower digital literacy. Along with this, there's minimal visual distraction. And anyone else here who teaches digital literacy, please chime in your thoughts on it. But I've taught a lot of classes, basic beginner digital skills. And one of the first topics we talk about typically is internet search, how to use Google, how to find information online. And often the biggest challenge there is it can be really overwhelming. When you do a Google search of anything, you get sponsored content at the top. There's images, there's videos, there's articles. You have to navigate to different websites and know to go back. There's a lot going on in a standard internet search. With ChatGPT, it's very simple. There aren't ads bombarding you, there aren't pop-ups. So that's another thing that I like that makes it very approachable and accessible for new users. Free access on any device. And again, Becca talked a little bit about the differences between the free and the paid versions. Most of these popular generative AI tools, I think, are similar, where there's a free and a paid version. But at least you can currently get free access. If creating an account is simple, you can use it through the browser, you can get the app. So I like that it works for any device. It also uses natural language, which makes it helpful. You don't have to think too much about how to phrase your question. Of course, you can, right? As you get advanced, you can follow Becca's advice and improve your skills at engineering your prompts to be really effective and to get right to what you're looking for. But when you're first starting out with generative AI, you can play around. You don't have to be complex to start with. You can just ask a question and sort of go back and forth and have a conversation, which makes it it makes it easy. You don't have to have any coding skills or anything. You just have to tell it what you want. And it's also multilingual. So I know we have bilingual folks on the call today. You can give a prompt in a different language. I'm not sure off the top of my head how many languages it supports, but it's nice that it can work between languages. And particularly if you're starting out and you didn't give a very specific prompt, ChatGPT will often follow up, sort of encouraging you to narrow down what you're looking for. So if you test this out and you give something like really open-ended, like, hey, write an email, it's gonna kind of prompt you and ask more information, like tell me what you need, tell me what this is about. And so I think that is another thing that makes it pretty approachable for beginners to play around with and experiment with until they sort of master the art of writing effective prompts. It's also non-judgmental. And so this might seem like a silly thing, and it sort of is, but I think sometimes talking to a robot and talking to AI might feel less intimidating than talking to a person. Oftentimes people are concerned, they might have, they might feel bad about not knowing something, they might feel uncomfortable asking a question. With ChatGPT, it's not really an issue. And so I'm not advising us to do this. I know that some people have taken to using ChatGPT for therapy. I'm not recommending that necessarily, but you can use ChatGPT to ask, stupid questions. Ale is not afraid to ask Chat anything. That's perfect. And I was testing this too from the perspective of someone learning basic digital skills, and I was pretty impressed with the results. I was asking it things like, how do I highlight text? I have a new computer. I don't know how to use it. What should I do? And ChatGPT spit out some really good suggestions of basic skills to work on, and you can really narrow it down with specific questions. How do I do that? What does that look like? And it will also give you practice activities to try out. Okay, so moving on to a couple of use cases. If you are a digital literacy instructor or a digital navigator, I wanted to suggest some things that you might use ChatGPT or your tool of choice for. So, and please suggest other use cases if you have any. But for example, let's say you're planning to lead a class, and you want some activities, some practice activities. If you've been doing that work for a long time, you probably have tons of ideas already about what activities to practice. But if it's a new topic for you, or if you're just getting into digital literacy training, you might not know. And so an example prompt, Becca, here's an example of a prompt you could give. List some practice activities ranging from easy to more advanced to use for adults learning how to use Google and the internet. And it will give you tons of great ideas to practice that skill. Another example, let's say you're working on Google Docs or Microsoft Word, whatever it might be, and you want your students to practice formatting, editing, correcting errors in that tool. You can ask this prompt: create a sample resume with lots of spelling and grammar errors. I tried this, and then I wasn't happy with the number of errors. I wanted more errors. So I said, make it worse. And ChatGPT made it worse. And so then instead of yourself spending 15 minutes typing up a really bad resume, you can just copy paste that and use that as text to work on in class. Or another example, I was teaching a class on how to comment in Google Docs. I had ChatGPT make up a story, and I was able to copy paste that just to use as material to work with. I'm just going to check the chat really quick and see if there are any great suggestions here.
Josie, also just time check. We're at 11 minutes. We're good,
Okay,
but just doing a time check.
sounds good. Yeah, using ChatGPT to create discussion questions. Yeah, these are great examples. Next slide, Becca. Okay, so I wanted you to kind of take a minute to think through how we might incorporate AI into existing digital literacy programs. CTN, for example, has been doing digital literacy training for 16 years. And so it might be a concern of how do we fit, do we come up with a whole new curriculum about AI? And I think about it a bit differently. I think about AI as just a new component that we can fit into our existing framework of curriculum and digital skills. So listed out here in the smaller bullet points are, it's a framework that we often follow in our basic digital literacy classes. And I want you to just take a minute to think about how you might incorporate AI into that. So, for example, if you're teaching internet search, you teach Google, just like normal, but you also teach about the little AI overviews that sometimes appear now when you do a Google search. And you can also teach about using ChatGPT as a search engine in a way. Email. You would talk about email just like normal, but then say, hey, ChatGPT can help draft emails for you. Safety and citizenship, similar. We've got all the normal concerns that we've always had. We're just sort of incorporating the new elements that come from AI. So media literacy has always been an issue. Fake news has been an issue. So we would just sort of add on to that and say, hey, let's look at some examples of AI-generated images that are fake or deep fakes. Same with camera and photos. We can talk about using ChatGPT to generate images. So I would just encourage you to think about this not as a brand new topic that you have to cover, but as something that you incorporate into the things you've been teaching. So just real briefly, some concerns. There are lots of concerns. I won't go over all these. This is not what we're focusing on in this webinar, but there are many, many valid concerns. And as we incorporate generative AI in our work, we need to be aware of this. We need to make sure that we're staying involved, that we're not becoming overly reliant on AI, that we're staying accountable, that we might use AI to help us, but we're ultimately accountable for what we create. So moving on, if that raised your blood pressure thinking about the concerns, I wanted to provide a little comic relief. These are some ChatGPT generated images of myself and Becca. Becca has a bunny, and this is a prompt. I asked for something very different. If you've played around much with AI generated images, they can be extremely entertaining, and I encourage you all to do that, especially if you're getting overly concerned about AI stealing your jobs. There are some things it can't do.
And I'm just going to chime in here that when Josie created that image for me, she fooled me. So I had stepped away from my computer at, middle of a work day. She texted me, hey, please get on Google Chat. And I'm thinking, oh no, I missed something at work. She's like, oh, I created this you're going hiking this weekend and you have a bunny. So as revenge, she lives in a beautiful cabin in Iowa, but has had some raccoon issues. So I created the image on the left as revenge for her, and I will be quiet and let her finish now.
And it's funny because this is the image of the many, many raccoons staring at me. It's just giving me flashbacks to reality. So it turned out very accurate in this case. So as we kind of move towards the end here, I just want you to kind of take away three small things for yourself, personally and professionally, but also if you work in digital inclusion and if you're doing classes or you're a digital navigator, encourage your community members and your learners to do the same regarding generative AI. Get curious. know the limitations, know the risks, bias, hallucinations, all that stuff. Keep it in mind as you're getting curious, as you're experimenting, and use that as you seek digital resilience because things are just going to keep changing. New tools are emerging. It seems like every week. A lot is ahead of us, and so I think we just need to do our best to stay optimistic, to take what we can from the tool and to leave what doesn't work for us, and do our best to help our communities benefit from this too, so that they're not falling further behind in the digital divide. Resources, we'll be sharing this out along with the recording, but if you want to grab the QR code quick to go to our list of resources, feel free to do that. Okay, Becca.
I'm going to go back to that QR code for just a second because we do have some time. Oops. I'm just going to stay right there as many of you know, on our exciting CTN's Day of Equity, we do have back-to-back-to-back webinars. And it's so great to see some of you come straight from authentic leadership into this one. I did want to, as you're taking pictures of this QR code for our resources, I did want to plug our next webinar right after this is Core Principles of Culturally Proficient Training. There will be a panel of CTN instructors that speak all kinds of different languages that are going to go through some strategies for that. Please join that. Here is our giveaway for this session. Appropriately, we are giving away CTN's online course, Asynchronous, Taking It at Your Own Pace, which covers teaching digital skills. And part of teaching digital skills is exactly what Josie said. The things that you're already doing, maybe throw in the AI component to fully round that out for your clients and for your patrons. What this course covers is the digital divide, a learner-centered approach to teaching adults. That's a very specific skill, as you know. And some of those components of teaching adults include the problem of being an expert at something and trying to teach someone else, the zone of proximal development. There's this particular zone of comfort between what we know and what we don't, and the mindset and utility of mistakes. And so we, during this, we have had our assistants use a program, thank you AI, that randomly chooses folks. But I would like to just have you chime in and let me know that you're here. And I'm sorry if I mispronounce any names. Do we have Victoria Salinas?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
For everyone who wins a free enrollment, I will be following up with your information. Congratulations, Victoria. Do we still have Mary Young?
I'm here. Woo! Big money, big money.
Big money. And do we have Ricardo Sanz? Ricardo Sanz? Oh, I recognize this name. Do we have Rachel Hawkins? Ooh, do we have Julie King?
Hey, I'm here.
Julie
Thank
rounds it
you.
out. Julie rounds it out. Thank you so much. One last slide for us, folks. There has been such a great chat. I wish that I could multitask, but I can't. So I'm going to go look at the chat later. And I know Josie is because she's our curriculum developer and she's so intellectually curious. But please, we're just quickly covering one of the biggest issues that's influencing our time and our cultural moment. It's like, oh, okay, we just spent 50 minutes talking about this life-changing thing. Please follow up with us at lift@communitytechnetwork.org for anything. for a continuation of this. As Josie mentioned, we will be sending out this recording. We will be sending out our resources. On behalf of Josie and myself and CTN, we would like to thank you so much for making this such an exciting discussion about AI. We'd like to thank you for joining us. And we really hope to continue this conversation with you in our personal communications and also in our professional ones in future webinars. So on behalf of Josie and Becca and CTN, thank you so much, and we hope to see you in our future sessions today.